بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والشاذ لغة المنفرد، واصطلاحا ما يخالف فيه الراوي من هو أرجح منه، وله تفسير آخر سيأتي. We went through the first four conditions for a narration to be Ṣaḥīḥ. So now the author mentions the fifth condition. And here again he suffices by merely mentioning the lughwi meaning, the literal meaning, and the istilahi meaning, the technical meaning. He does not give any further information because he is going to discuss all of this in detail later on. So he says, وَالشَّاذُ لُغَةً الْمُنْفَرِدُ, that the literal definition of shadh is solitary, when someone is alone, and it is generally used in a negative way. When a person is the only one that is doing wrong, then we use the term shadh. You know, it comes in the Ḥadīth of Tirmidhi, وَمَنْ شَذَّ شَذَّ فِي النَّارِ. وَاصْطِلَاحًا مَا يُخَالِفُ فِيهِ الرَّاوِي مَنْ هُوَ أَرْجَحُ مِنْهُ. The technical meaning is that it is that narration where the narrator opposes one who is more preferred, arjah, a person who is more preferred than him. So this here is simple, that it means if one narrator contradicts another narrator who is better than him, then the narration will be shadh. But now, in this definition, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah uses the word rawi. You can see he's saying ma yukhalifu fihi rawi. So it's leaving it general, that it's where a rawi, a narrator, is contradicting. Now the word rawi, it encompasses those who are reliable, and it also encompasses those who are weak. So some commentators, they suggested that it would have been better for Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah to rather use the word thiqa in the text. Allama Qasim ibn Qutlubgha rahimahullah, he mentions in Al-Qawl al-Mubtakar on page 50, يَدُخُلُ فِيهِ الْمُنْكَرِ, that by merely mentioning the word rawi, it incorporates a munkar narration. And what's a munkar narration? A munkar narration is that narration where you have a person who is weak and he is going against someone who is reliable. So the person who is more reliable is arjah minhu, isn't it? So therefore it incorporates munkar. Therefore, Allama Qasim ibn Qutlubgha rahimahullah, he says, فَالصَّوَابُ أَن يَقُولُ, that it would have been correct for him to say, مَا يُخَالِفُ فِيهِ الثِّقَةَ مَنْ هُوَ أَرْجَحُ مِنْهُ. That the correct way of mentioning it is to say that مَا يُخَالِفُ فِيهِ الثِّقَةَ, that it is where a reliable person is contradicting someone who is more preferred than him. So now you understand the meaning of shadh, that the person, you have two chains. Both chains have reliable narrators, but this and the reliable narrator of the one chain is contradicting a reliable narrator who is more preferred than him in the other chain. So therefore he's saying that you should rather have given the definition as ma yukhalifu fihi athiqa instead of using the word rawi. Now this here is important. Why? Because a definition has to be precise. We mentioned previously that it has to be jami', it has to be all-encompassing, and it has to be mani'. It also has to include that which does not form part of the definition. So for it to be mani', Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah really had to use the word thiqa. Otherwise, like Allama Qasim rahimahullah is mentioning, that it would incorporate munkar narrations. So therefore, even though it might seem like it's so simple, it's just replacing a word, and even though he's just giving this definition in passing, it was essential for him to choose his words correctly so that the reader can understand the definition correctly and that there is no confusion. Furthermore, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah uses the word arjah, which means to be more preferred. So there are many ways in which a narration can be more preferred. At times it could be because of the caliber of the narrator. In the other tariq, maybe it's a hafiz, maybe it's an imam. At times preference could be because of the number of narrators. So maybe here you have one student who is quoting it in a particular way, and then you have 5 students who are quoting from that very same sheikh in a different way. So although all 6 of them are reliable, all 6 of them are trustworthy, all 6 of them are very precise and accurate, but because this one is contradicting those 5, we will give preference to how those 5 students are quoting it from that very same sheikh. So inshallah we'll discuss all of this here under the chapter of shadh. Then after presenting this definition, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimullah says, وَلَهُ تَفْسِيرٌ آخَرْ سَيَأْتِي. The shadh has another explanation, and that will come. So the other definition comes on page 104. So in this book, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimullah is going to mention a total of 2 definitions for shadh. Mullah Ali Qari rahimullah, he presents 7 definitions for the term shadh. And these are based on how earlier muhaddithin used the term. So 2 of his definitions are from another person and 5 are from himself. So inshallah we will discuss all of that when we reach the chapter of shadh. And according to earlier Hanafi scholars, shadh is a narration that contradicts the apparent meaning of the Quran. So you can see already the difference between the definition of the muhaddithin and the definition of the Hanafis. That the muhaddithin, they are saying that you have one reliable person contradicting those who are more preferred over him. That is considered a shadh. However, Hanafis, we are saying that when a narration contradicts the apparent meaning of the Quran, so even though the narrator is not contradicting other narrators, the narration that he is transmitting is contradicting the apparent text of the Quran, then we will call it shadh. Likewise, if it contradicts the established sunnah, so what's the meaning of established sunnah? It refers to mutawatir narrations or mashhur narrations. Or even if it has to contradict the general principles, then we will call that narration as shadh. So you can read this here on page 102 of Al-Madkhal ila Usul al-Ḥadīth ala Manhaj al-Hanafiyya. Now here it's also important to note that we will only regard a narration as shadh when it is impossible to combine the apparent contradiction. So Allama al-Qaani rahimahullah, he mentions this crucial point, and this here must be kept in mind. It's in Qadā al-Watar on page 676. He says, وَلَا بُدَّ فِي الْمُخَالَفَةِ أَن يَتَعَذَّرَ الْجَمْعُ وَإِلَّا فَلَا شُذُوذ. That it's necessary that we will consider a narration to be contradictory. أَن يَتَعَذَّرَ الْجَمْعُ, if it is difficult to combine the 2 narrations. وَإِلَّا, if it is possible, you can interpret this narration in a particular way, then فَلَا شُذُوذ, it will not be considered as shadh. So there are so many other things to mention about shadh. Like I say, we will discuss all of that inshallah when we reach the chapter of shadh. Then another point is that in his definition, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he did not place the condition that a narration should not be munkar. And we just explained that what's a munkar narration? It is where a weak narrator contradicts a reliable narrator. So what would that mean? Since he's not putting it in the condition, would we say that if a weak narrator is contradicting a reliable narrator, then the narration can be authentic because it's not included, the condition of not being munkar is not included in the definition? So you will see Allama Tajuddin at-Tabrizi rahimahullah, he placed this condition when defining Ṣaḥīḥ. In his book Al-Kafi fi Ulum al-Ḥadīth on page 129, and it sounds like 129 that it's very far in the book. It's actually in the beginning. It becomes page 129 because of the lengthy introduction. So he mentioned there, look at how he defines Ṣaḥīḥ narration. He says, وَفِي الْإِصْطِلَاحِ وَالْحَدِيثُ الْمُسْنَدِ الَّذِي اتصل إسنادهم. So you understand this here? It's a musnad narration which the sanad of it is muttasil, there are no broken links. بِنَقْلِ عَدْلٍ ضَابِط, and it's transmitted by someone who is adil and ضابط. We explained this, these terminologies. عن عدل ضابط إلى منتهاه من غير شذوذ وعلة قادحة ولا نكارة. So you can see ولا نكارة, it's meaning that it should not be such that a weak narrator opposes those who are more reliable than him. So he added this condition. But Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he did not add that condition here in his definition. So the reason why Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah did not regard it as necessary to bring that condition of the narration not being munkar is because the condition will already be covered within the condition of shadh. So this is what Allama Munawi rahimahullah mentions. He says in Al-Yawaqit wa-Durar, فاشتراط نفي الشذوذ يقتضي اشتراط نفيه بالأولى. That if you are saying that if a reliable narrator, if he has to contradict someone who is more reliable, then the narration will no more be authentic. Then if a weak narrator has to contradict someone who is more reliable, then all the more reason the narration will not be authentic. Likewise, another answer is that the first condition of Ṣaḥīḥ already makes it impossible for a narration to be munkar. Because what is the first condition? It is that the narrator must be adl, isn't it? So we cannot reach the point where a weak narrator can oppose that person who is reliable, and we will still consider the narration. Why? Because we are already going to disregard the narration by the fact that the narrator he does not fulfill this first condition of adl, or maybe he does not fulfill the second condition of being tamud dabt. Moving on, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah now gives a grammatical analysis of this definition. Or rather we can say that he is justifying his usage of the words in his definition. So he says, تنبيه قوله وخبر الآحاد كالجنس وباقي قيوده كالفصل وقوله بنقل عدل احتراز عما ينقله غير عدل وقوله هو يسمى فصلا يتوسط بين المبتدأ والخبر يؤذن بأن ما بعده خبر عما قبله وليس بنعت له وقوله لذاته يخرج ما يسمى صحيحا بأمر خارج عنه كما تقدم. So here he is explaining his words and his sentence structure when presenting the definition in Nukhbatul Fikr. So let us first look at the sentence that he mentioned in Nukhbatul Fikr. In Nukhbatul Fikr, and I trust that you all memorizing Nukhbatul Fikr inshaAllah. So in Nukhbatul Fikr he wrote وَخَبْرُ الْآحَادِ بِنَقْلِ عَدْلٍ تَامِ الضَّبْطِ مُتَّصِلِ السَّنَدِ غير معلل ولا شاذ هو الصحيح لذاته. So you can see the sentence. So there are 3 points to take note in this sentence. That the first is, how is he opening the sentence? How is he commencing his statement? So he's commencing the sentence with the words وَخَبْرُ الْآحَادِ. Then he first brought the ta'arif, he first brought the definition. So he's saying وَخَبْرُ الْآحَادِ بِنَقْلِ عَدْلٍ تَامِ الضَّبْطِ مُتَّصِلِ السَّنَدِ. All this here is the definition. And then the object of the definition, what is he defining? The mu'arraf. He's mentioning that right at the end. He's saying huwa sahihu lidhati. Can you see his sentence structure and his choice of words and the way he's presenting it? So therefore it was essential for him to clarify why he put the sentence in this way. So he says tambih qawluhu, that note he's saying. Now here, although he's speaking of his own statement, he phrases it in the third person. He says وَخَبْرُ الْآحَادِ كَالْجِنْس. That the word khabrul ahad this here is a jins. So jins is general, and then he says wabaqi quyudihi kal fasl. All the other conditions, they are like the fasl, that they are specific and they are excluded. So jins is also what we refer to as jami'. So it refers to that which is broad and universal and all encompassing. So by saying khabrul ahad, it incorporates each and every narration that is khabrul wahid. So that means the narration can be weak, it can be extremely weak, it can even be a hasan, it will be included. Now he needs to bring conditions which will exclude those narrations which do not fulfill the condition. So he says that all the other conditions, they are like a fasl, and this is what we also refer to as mani'. That means that all of these separate and exclude that which does not form part of it. So he says kal jins ay yashmalu sahih wa ghayruhu. By saying kal jins, it refers to everything, and then by saying kal that wabaqi quyudihi kal fasl, that excludes. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, his objective is to demonstrate that even though he started his sentence with the words wa khabrul ahad, he is not defining khabrul ahad, because a person might assume that he's saying wa khabrul ahad and thereafter he's giving the definition, so he's not mentioning the mu'arraf immediately. Probably the mu'arraf is khabrul ahad, so he's defining khabrul ahad. The definition encompasses every khabrul wahid, every narration, but then every condition narrows it down and narrows it down and narrows it down until it only covers those narrations that are sahih. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah now gives an example of how this happens. He says, وَقَوْلُهُ بِنَقْلِ عَدْلٍ احْتِرَازٌ عَمَّا يَنْقُلُهُ غَيْرُ عَدْلٍ. That when he says بِنَقْلِ عَدْل, then this here is like a reservation, عَمَّا يَنْقُلُهُ غَيْرُ عَدْلٍ, that he's protecting himself from that which a person who is not adil, a person who is not upright, has transmitted. So there are 5 conditions for sahih, isn't it? But Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is only giving this one example. He's giving the example of how the first condition would exclude so many narrations because they fall short in fulfilling that condition. And then he leaves it for the reader to apply his own mind and discover how the remaining conditions would exclude lots of narrations that are khabrul wahid but not authentic. So he does not mention about the other conditions, but commentators explain. So Ulama Munawi rahimahullah said, محترزات تعريف صحيح وخرج بالقيد الأول ما نقله فاسق أو مجهول عين أو حالا أو معروف بالضعف. That the first condition of adl, it excludes every khabrul wahid that it's transmitted by a sanam, or by someone who is unknown, or someone who is known to be weak. Then وبالثاني ما نقله مغفل كثير الخطأ. The second condition of تام الضبط, that excludes those narrations which are transmitted by a person who makes lots of mistakes, or a person who is very negligent, because that indicates to us that he was not accurate in the way that he preserved that narration. And then he says, وَبِالثَّالِث الْمُنْقَطِعُ وَالْمُعْضَلْ وَالْمُرْسَلْ. So all these terminologies will explain. Basically, if there are missing links, then those are excluded by the third condition. And then he stops there. But the condition of mu'allal excludes every khabrul wahid which has a hidden defect. And the condition of adam al-shudud, that excludes every khabrul wahid where there is contradiction. So in this way, every condition specifies it until ultimately it only includes those narrations that are authentic. Now here a person can object because Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah wants to be so technical and he wants to go into this amount of intricate detail. So then Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah should have also told us why he used the conditions of adl and tam al-dabt in the singular form. That adl is singular, tam al-dabt is singular. But all the narrators in the sanad, all the narrators in a chain of transmission, they have to possess these qualities. So why is he using the singular when multiple narrators, even though they are in different links, multiple narrators have to fulfill these conditions? So he ought to say that it is that narration that is transmitted through udul, through those people who are all reliable. He is supposed to mention it in the plural, because it's not only one person, a person in one link that has to be reliable. Rather, in each and every link, all the narrators have to be reliable. So the answer to this, and this also shows you how the commentators use their minds. The answer to this is because Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentioned the condition of ittisal sanad. So by saying that the sanad has to be muttasil, that it has to be fully linked, and it has to be continuous, it covers the condition in each and every link. So therefore, although the first two conditions are mentioned in the singular form, the third condition, it then extends it to each and every link. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he then explains the next word of Nukhbat al-Fikr, and he says وَقَوْلُهُ هُوَ, that he said huwa sahih lidhati. So why did he have to add this word huwa? So he says yusamma faslan, that this word is called a fasl. It's called that which separates. And why is it called a fasl? يتوسط بين المبتدأ والخبر, that it separates between the mubtada and a khabar. It separates between the subject and the predicate. يؤذن بأن ما بعده خبر عما قبله. That it also shows that whatever comes after the word huwa is the khabar of the word which comes before it. وليس بنعت له, and it is not a sifa, it's not a description of it. So he's explaining that the reason why he used the word huwa is because it's a fasal, and it's separating the mubtada and the khabar. And he's also then mentioning that it's not a sifa for the words, because if you look at the text of Nukhbatul Fikr, the words as-Ṣaḥīḥ لذاته has an alif lam, isn't it? Look there, وخبر الأحد بنقل عدل تام الضبط متصل السند غير معلل ولا شاذ as-Ṣaḥīḥ لذاته. Assuming he didn't use the word huwa, then the sentence would be incomplete, because the words as-Ṣaḥīḥ لذاته would have been a sifa, it would have been a na'at, it would have been a description for the words, for all that comes before it. So therefore it was essential, it was important for him to add the word huwa. So although he explains this here, but this whole explanation regarding the word huwa, it's obvious and it's not something that is worth stating and clarifying. You know that if you have to clarify something, then you clarify that which is important and that which will add value for the reader. You do not clarify something that's obvious. So this was something which was not worth explaining, because any person who understands Arabic, and only that person who understands Arabic, is going to be reading this book, isn't it? So once a person understands Arabic, he will understand that, okay, it was essential, it was important, it was necessary for him to use the word huwa. So Allama Munawi rahimahullah then quotes, and he says, اعترضه بعض المحققين بأن هذه ليست نكتة الإتيان به على ما قاله أرباب المعاني بل نكتته إفادة التخصيص والقصر. That Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah could have rather offered a better reason for the usage of the word huwa. That he should have explained that by using the word huwa between the subject and the predicate, between the mubtada and the khabar, you get more emphasis and more restriction in the sentence. So when a narration fulfills these conditions, then most definitely the narration will be Ṣaḥīḥ لذاته. So this is a valuable point, that we mention in the word huwa, it now gives you takhsis, it now specifies it, that it has to fulfill these very conditions, and it also has to give qasr, that only if it fulfills these conditions, then it will be Ṣaḥīḥ لذاته. So this indeed is a valuable point, this indeed is a point worth explaining. Finally, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he explains about adding the words لذاته. He says, وقوله لذاته يخرج ما يسمى صحيحا بأمر خارج عنه كما تقدم. That the reason why he add the words لذاته, so لذاته means that the narration is authentic in itself. It does not need any external aid or something to strengthen it and raise its status. So he's saying the reason why he added these words لذاته is so that it excludes those narrations which are sahih, but they become sahih because of external reasons. So the only reason they are becoming sahih is because of those external reasons. Otherwise, they would not have been sahih. So that concludes everything about the definition of a narration that is classified as sahih. That for a narration to be classified as sahih according to the muhaddithin, it must fulfill all these 5 conditions. So muhaddithun, they are very strict that a narration has to fulfill each and every condition from these 5 conditions, then only the narration would be authentic. However, the scholars of fiqh and usul, they are more lenient. Allama ibn Daqiq al-Eid rahimahullah, he mentioned in al-Iqtirah on page 187, and this is just like how I told you about al-Kafi, that it's actually right at the beginning of the kitab, but the reason why it becomes page 187 is because of the lengthy introduction. So he says, وزاد أصحاب الحديث ألا يكون شاذا ولا معللا. That the scholars of hadith, they add two conditions and they regard these conditions as integral, essential, and it's important that the narration has to fulfill these conditions, that ألا يكون شاذا ولا معللا, the narration should not be shadh and it should not be معلل. وفي هذين الشرطين نظر على مقتضى مذهب الفقهاء. But the fuqaha, they would not concentrate and they would not focus on these two conditions. فإن كثيرا من العلل التي يعلل بها المحدثون الحديث لا تجري على أصول الفقهاء. Look at this important statement of his. He's saying many of the defects which scholars of hadith would outline and clarify and claim that because of these reasons the narration should be weak. لا تجري على أصول الفقهاء. These are defects which the fuqaha would not give any attention to. So to give you an example of this, Imam Hakim rahimahullah, when he was explaining the 10 different categories of narrations, then he said, القسم الثالث من الصحيح المختلف فيه, that the third type of authentic narrations which are differed upon is خبر يرويه ثقة. Now look at this here, that you have a reliable person who is transmitting. خبر يرويه ثقة من الثقات عن إمام من أئمة المسلمين. And this reliable person is quoting from an imam. So what does that mean? It means that it's an authentic narration. فيسنده. But this a reliable person, he quotes it from that imam as a statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ثم يرويه عنه جماعة من الثقات فيرسلونه. But then other reliable narrators, so we can consider them as the colleagues of this narrator, they transmit from that very same imam فيرسلونه, but they quote it as words of another person and not as words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he gives an example. He says, look, you have a narration of Sa'id ibn Jubair, and it's mentioned to be via Ibn Abbas from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man sami'a an-nida' falam yujib fala salata lahu illa min udhrin." So Imam Hakim rahimahullah says that Adi ibn Thabit, he narrated from Sa'id ibn Jubair like this, and Adi ibn Thabit, he is a reliable narrator. So how is he narrating it? That Sa'id ibn Jubair quoted from Ibn Abbas, who quoted from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a full muttasil narration. It's a musnad narration. But then he says, وَقَدْ وَقَّفَهُ سَائِرُ أَصْحَابِ سَعِيدِ ibn Jubair anhu. But all the other students of Sa'id ibn Jubair, they mention it as a statement of Sa'id ibn Jubair. Can you see? What a huge difference. We have one reliable person quoting it as words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But all the other students, how are they quoting it? They are quoting it as the statement of that imam. So then the point to show you is that after mentioning this example, look at what Imam Hakim rahimahullah explains. He says, وَهَذَا الْقِسْمِ مِمَّا يَكْثُرُ, that this here happens very frequently. ويستدل بهذا المثال على جملة من الأخبار المروية هكذا. This is one example, but there are numerous other examples that are transmitted like this here. فهذه الأخبار صحيحة على مذهب الفقهاء. These narrations will be authentic according to fuqaha. According to fuqaha, they are going to say that, okay, we can now consider this here to be a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فإن القول عندهم فيها قول من زاد في الإسناد أو المتن إذا كان ثقة. فأما أئمة الحديث فإن القول فيها عندهم قول الجمهور الذي أرسلوه. That the muhaddithin, they are going to look at the others and they are going to consider this narration of Adi ibn Thabit to be shadh, isn't it? So they are going to reject this narration of Adi ibn Thabit. They're going to say that he is contradicting man huwa arjah minhu, and therefore they will prefer those narrations. Basically, the crux of this here, an important point to keep in mind, is that the fuqaha, when they are looking at a narration, then they are looking at it with the objective of practicing upon the narration. So you have to consider what lenses they have. If a person put red lenses, then everything he sees is going to be red. If a person put a green tint on his spectacles, everything he sees is going to be green. So the fuqaha, they view narrations with the objective of practicing upon the narrations. So for them, if you cannot establish wujub, or if you cannot establish that something is compulsory, then at the very least we can prove that it is sunnah, or that it is mustahab, or even if it is just permissible. So they are looking at it with this lens, with this tent, and therefore they are more lenient. So the more narrations that they can attain to practice upon, the better it is for them. But in contrast to that, the muhaddithin, they are viewing narrations with the objective of protecting the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And therefore, they are more strict. And that is why Ulama Iraqi rahimahullah, he explained why Ulama ibn Salah rahimahullah added these two important conditions of Adam al-Shudud and Adam al-Illa. He explained it saying, and this is in At-Taqir wal-Idah, والجواب أن من يصنف في علم الحديث إنما يذكر الحد عند أهله لا من عند غيرهم من أهل علم آخر. So this shows you, the reason why I'm quoting this is to show you that the fuqaha, they have a different definition of Ṣaḥīḥ. This is important when we are going through the ahadith of ahkam, because it might then seem that these narrations are in contrast to the definition of Ṣaḥīḥ presented in Nuzha an-Naḍar, and therefore they are not authentic narrations. But then you might scratch your head and wonder, then how are they using these narrations for istidlal? So you need to understand that these conditions for a Ṣaḥīḥ narration, they apply to each and every narration, whether it's a narration that is discussing fada'il, whether it is a narration that is discussing a seerah and mentioning an incident in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or even if you want to extend it to the ahadith of ahkam. However, it does not mean that those narrations would really be weak according to those who are making istinbat, according to the mujtahideen and according to the fuqaha. Another point to keep in mind with regards to these 5 conditions is that all 5 conditions, according to the muhaddithin, they have to be found, then only will the narration be Ṣaḥīḥ. But even then, you might have a narration that might seem to fulfill the 5 conditions, but scholars would differ. And that is how you have differences of opinion on whether a narration is authentic or not. So for example, some scholars, they might say that this narrator, he fails in fulfilling the condition of adala, because maybe, say for example, he mentioned a statement which has a dual meaning. So they will focus on the fact that this here is the possibility of being a lie, and they will say that this person lied, how can we accept his narrations? However, others, they would say no, that this, you can interpret his statement in this way, so he did not lie, and therefore he is an honest person, and we can accept his narrations. Likewise, there might be a person who made a couple of mistakes. So some might overlook that mistakes. Others would say no, these are grave mistakes. We mentioned about dhabt. The yardstick is on inspecting his narrations, that you will now look, okay, he's making mistakes in this amount of narrations. So we explained previously, some scholars, they would regard it to be a huge amount, whilst others, they would look that comparatively this amount is very minimal. Likewise, with regards to ittisal al-sanad, if a tabi'i is quoting directly from the Prophet ﷺ, then some scholars, they will assume that the missing link is either a sahabi or a senior tabi'i, and therefore they will accept the narration. So they will feel that the only reason that the tabi'i did not reveal his source, he did not mention from who he got the narration, is because he was absolutely sure that the person who told him that narration is reliable, it's probably a sahabi, so therefore there was no reason for him to mention who told him the narration. But other scholars, they will not accept this, because they will say, look, at the end of the day, there is a missing link. It does not fulfill this condition of ittisal al-sanad. So this here led to differences on whether a narration will be Ṣaḥīḥ or not. And on this point also, you get some narrators who are mutashaddid. They are very strict on the smallest of errors. They would disregard a narration. And then you get those who are mutasahil, those who are lenient and more accommodating. And this is also an important point to keep in mind when you're doing takhrij and you come across the verdicts and the judgments of earlier scholars. You need to consider the mizaj of that scholar, the temperament of that person who is mentioning the statement. Was he a mutashaddid or was he a mutasahil? And then here also, Alama Munawi rahimahullah raises an important point when explaining this text of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah. He says that at times, scholars grade a chain only on the first three conditions. So scholar will look at the fact that the person who is quoting it is reliable, he has a good memory, and the chain is fully linked. And because of it fulfilling these three conditions, he will say, Isnaduhu Ṣaḥīḥ, that the sanad is authentic. So if a scholar have to say, Isnaduhu Ṣaḥīḥ, will that mean that the narration is authentic? No, it does not mean that the narration is authentic. Why? Because the scholar is only focusing on the first three conditions, and he is very specifically only speaking about the sanad. He's saying isnaduhu sahih. He's not speaking about the entire narration. And you know, the narration composes and comprises of the sanad and the matn. So the sanad can be authentic, but because the text is contradicting another narration in a way that it's impossible to combine and reconcile those two narrations, or you cannot find a way of giving preference to the one over the other, you don't know which narration was first and which was second, so you don't know which one is abrogated, this narration will be weak. Why it's going to be weak? Because it's falling short in the remaining two conditions of Adam al-Shuduz and not being mu'allal. So therefore, if scholars say isnaduhu sahih, then this does not necessarily mean that the narration is authentic. And this here is very common amongst the mutaakhirin. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, Alama Busiri rahimahullah, so many scholars, Alama Haythami rahimahullah, they use words like this to comment on a narration. Likewise, if scholars claim ruwatuhu thiqat, that the narrators are reliable, then all the more reason. Why? Because this means that only the first two conditions are fulfilled. Now we don't even know whether the third condition is fulfilled or not. So we don't know whether there are missing links or whether the sanad is muttasil, because he's only mentioning that the narrators are reliable, that they fulfill the conditions of adala and dhabt. Now, whether there's a shudud or whether there are hidden defects, etc., that we don't know. So therefore, Alama Munawi rahmallah said, وَعَلَمْ أَنَّهُمْ قَدْ يَحْكُمُونَ لِلْإِسْنَادِ بِالصِّحَّةِ فَيَقُولُونَ هَذَا حَدِيثٌ إِسْنَادُهُ صَحِيحٌ دون الحكم للمتن بها ونحو هذا حديث صحيح لأن الإسناد قد يصح لثقة رجاله ولا يصح حديثه لشذوذ أو علة. But then after mentioning this point, he mentions that there are instances where we will consider it as a verdict on the entire narration. So he then says, لكن المعتمد فيهم إذا اقتصر على قول صحيح الإسناد الظاهر منه الحكم بأنه صحيح في نفسه بقرينة عدم ذكره القادح. So this here is that if we find that he's saying isnadu sahih, and especially if we do not find any other scholar weakening that narration, then we could consider and say that, okay, since he did not clearly define to us any defect, for now we can consider that narration to be authentic. But then you might wonder that what is the benefit of using these terms? So the reason why later day scholars use these terms isnadu qawi, isnadu sahih, ruwatu thiqat, is because they were not convinced that the narration fulfills the remaining conditions. Because we mentioned that with regards to mu'allal, it is the job of an expert. Only an expert can determine if there are hidden defects. Likewise for shaz, only one who conducts an in-depth study on all the different turuq, he looks at how all the different narrators quoted this year, and once he has all the different asanid in front of him, and he now surveys and checks between them and inspects how each and every person quoted it, then he can determine whether there is a shuduz, whether there is this person is contradicting another person who is arjah, who is more preferred over him. So from this here you can see that just to grade one narration as sahih, you first have to be an expert, because then only you will know whether there are hidden defects or not. And then you need to conduct a detailed study on each and every narration on that particular topic, because only in that way you will know whether there is contradiction or not. So in today's times, you have some people who grade a narration by simply opening Taqrīb al-Tahdhīb, and then they use Taqrīb al-Tahdhīb like a dictionary. So they say, okay, this narrator is reliable, that narrator is reliable, that narrator is reliable. So after 3 minutes of research, they say that, yeah, now the narration is authentic. So you can see that it's a lengthy study, that after even conducting hours of research, Huffaz and great and eminent scholars, they were hesitant to grade the narration. And even worse is that if you have an online search engine, so like you go on Maktabat al-Shamila, you just press a few buttons and then you claim now that this narration is authentic. وَمُنِعَ بِأَنَّ هَذَا يَقْضِي إِلَى الْإِسْتِرْوَاحِ بحيث يحكم على الحديث بالصحة قبل تتبع طرقه التي يعلم بها الشذوذ نفيا وإثباتا وقد يتمسك بذلك من لا يحسن فالأحسن سد الباب. So he's saying that even though if you don't find anyone criticizing, then too we should rather just close this door. We should rather close this door and say that if a person is saying that it's isnadu sahih, then we cannot say that the narration is authentic. Rather, you have to research and see that does it fulfill all 5 conditions or not. So alhamdulillah, that brings us to the end of this definition of sahih. As we come to the end of this definition, it will be good for you if you can please do some extra reading here. So you can go to Al-Madkhal ila Usul al-Hadith ala Manhaj al-Hanafiyya and read from page 41 to page 51. And consider whatever you are reading to be part of this dars. So if you have any questions on anything, or if something seems to be difficult, you are not understanding properly, then please feel free to ask, and inshallah I'll send you a voice note. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.